Thank you very much. Radio mics are good enough for you, or Victor, should we stick to radio microphones? We need another one. What if they start speaking at the same time? Okay. Thank you very much. It will be a very interesting discussion because we will speaking about regulatory issues. We will talk about the situation. We'll try to identify the current situation in the sphere. So first of all, let's listen to the presentations of our speakers. Kevin, the floor is yours.
Okay, so hello again. The second time I'm speaking today. But what I wanted to do is to start this discussion off by just giving a summary of what we believe to be the regulatory situation with respect to internet exchange points in Central Asia. So we commissioned a study about the end of 2021. This was an internet society in conjunction with the RIPE NCC and an organization called Cullen International, who are experts in telecommunications regulation. And we did this because we really didn't completely understand the situation in the countries of Central Asia. We heard lots of different conflicting advice about what the situation was. So we thought we would at least try to collate this information into a report and into this presentation. One of the reasons we try to do this is we're not totally certain that this is going to be accurate and definitive information, but we would like to get feedback, and we hope this will stimulate some conversation in this panel. But please, if you see anything that's incorrect in this presentation, please come and talk to me, or you can come to the mic, because yeah, some of this, it's as accurate as we can find the information. Okay, so the screen's gone off here at the front. Okay, so this is covering the 5 countries of Central Asia: Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan. So just a quick overview of the IXP situation in Europe and Eurasia. So this map shows you a plot of where the IXPs are located. And I think what becomes very apparent is there is quite a big gap in Central Asia. I think we count a total of 5 IXPs in the region. We may have missed some. I know there is a startup one in Uzbekistan. I'm not sure that's on that map. But certainly you can see there is a big gap there if you look at the rest of the region. So that's really what this talk is about. Okay, so we first of all asked the questions, are there any specific laws that apply to IXPs in the region? So with respect to Kazakhstan, we understand that this is a state monopoly, and you need to deal with the government technical services law if you want to establish an IXP. With Kyrgyzstan, the situation is different. There aren't specific laws, but you do need to obtain a telecommunications license, we understand. Tajikistan, we couldn't find any specific laws, but we know there are certain restrictions on establishing an IXP there. So it seems not actually to be enshrined in any specific law, but we know there are some practical issues there. Turkmenistan, we're not actually completely sure. From what we understand, there are 2 laws which apply to IXPs. There's actually a relatively small number of network operators in Turkmenistan, so this may not be a practical issue at the moment. And then Uzbekistan, again, no specific laws, but IXPs have to operate under a couple of telecommunications laws there. And by comparison, we looked at Western European countries, and we couldn't see any requirements for licenses or other other regulatory requirements for establishing an IXP. So in terms of actually the requirements to establish an IXP, again, Kazakhstan is a state monopoly. In Kyrgyzstan, you need to obtain two licenses. The application fee is, so actually it's 2 license fees from 2 separate ministries, we understand. But the application fee is relatively low and it's relatively quick to get these licenses. So it seems relatively easy to establish an IXP there. With Tajikistan, then there's a need to obtain a data transmission license, and there's also a need to register and pay taxes as well. Certainly that we spent quite a lot of time in Tajikistan in the last 5 years, and so that's definitely our practical understanding. Turkmenistan, again, we don't completely know the situation, but we understand some licensing is required. And again, in Uzbekistan, the IXPs have to obtain an ISP license, and actually they need to get their equipment certified. By comparison, Western Europe, again, no licenses or other requirements to actually start an IXP. Okay, so then we come to, okay, you want to set up your IXP, but now you want to interconnect networks through your IXP. So again, in Kazakhstan, the networks must connect through the GTS, we understand. In Kyrgyzstan, it seems the networks are free to interconnect without any difficulties, except there are some regulations that apply to mobile data providers. So presumably that's the mobile telecom operators. In Tajikistan, we believe that most of the telecom operators are paired to some extent with each other. And these agreements are registered with the government communications service. Whether this is genuine settlement-free peering, we are not entirely sure. We suspect it might not be. Again, Turkmenistan, we're not completely clear. So if anyone's from Turkmenistan here and could come and fill us in here, that would be really appreciated. But yeah, again, we believe these rules are defined by one of the regulators. And then with Uzbekistan, there's a requirement to submit peering requests to the State Cybersecurity Office. We're not, again, completely sure of the details there. Okay, this is very simple. What kinds of networks may interconnect? Really, there's not really any restrictions, as long as you're licensed, or if you're not required to be licensed, it's not an issue. And generally, the actual interconnections, once you've become licensed or paid the fees or have got the right approvals, seems to be quite straightforward. And then security laws. So are there specific security laws applicable to IXPs? So again, Kazakhstan does not have specific laws, we understand, except the GTS requirements. Kyrgyzstan, no specific laws, although there are some, there is a telecommunications search law, which applies to all telecommunications and mobile phone operators. Tajikistan, again, peer-to-peer communications don't seem to have any content filtering or require any monitoring, but we believe this is done at another level within the system. Again, Turkmenistan, not really sure. And in Uzbekistan, there seems to be no content filtering regulations, but there are some telecoms regulations that may apply to just general service. But again, please correct us if we're wrong. So the situation is very different in each country. Again, I'd like to reiterate that there are still some gaps in our knowledge here. And even where we do know this information, it doesn't always completely tell the whole story. So again, we welcome input on this. But the reason we're asking this question is because we're really trying to understand what the barriers might be to establishing an IXP, and whether it's something we need to work with in the context of creating setting up and establishing IXP facilities. Okay, but that's it from me. So I will hand over back to Shavkat.
Спасибо большое. Я предлагаю заслушать второго спикера и
Thank you
затем...
very much. I'd like to turn over to the second speaker, and then we'll open up the floor for discussion and discuss how we're going to move forward in our region. Over to you.
Благодарю, Шавкат. Я послушал
Thank you,
доклады.
Shavkat. I listened to the presentation. That's very interesting. A few words about Kazakhstan, just to add to what was already said. This year, there was an amendment to the law. Prior to that, there was a description in the law that the IXP is a programmatic set. Well, it's a point for exchange of traffic for operators that are licensed, that have the license to provide intercity and interregional traffic and communications. And geographically, well, legally, it was only operators who had those licenses. And about 2 months ago, they changed this law and amended it and removed the limitations for MGMM. And now there are small operators, local operators also have the right to share or to create peer-to-peer connections. And there are two IXPs in Almaty and Astana, but I can say that people ignored it for some time, and local operators did peer, even though the formally law was breached. And the second thing is, it was mentioned here that there were no certain requirements with regards to how to connection. I would like to say that yes, there are requirements. They're pretty formal and very straightforward. I'm afraid that I am not going to quote the resolution correctly, so I don't want to lie to you and give you the wrong name, but there are requirements for connecting to IXP with certain requirements. So they list certain requirements. They're more formal than technical, but with all the fairness, I'd like to say that there are requirements for that. So a few comments on my part, and maybe it will be useful to you. Thank you. I didn't want to mention this, but because I said that there would be unified requirements for information in terms of information security, where operators would have certain requirements that they would have to abide to. It's being discussed right now, and this is an ongoing issue right now. So, how are you doing in Kyrgyzstan in terms of regulations and development, and specifically for IXP, peering, etc.? Hello? Yes, the mic is on. That's great. I thought that our format would be more of a discussion, but since Kevin made this good overview, I would also like to give you an overview of the situation with the legislation, not just in my country, but for Central Asia in general. And a few words on the background. Since 1998, I've been working on supporting legal and regulatory development of the telecom sector. And recently, we've expanded to cover all digital solutions from the standpoint of legislation. And I started off by creating an IXP in Tajikistan, in Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan. It didn't work out because at the time when we started promoting an IXP here in Kazakhstan, Kazakh Telecom already provided an IXP service, so we had nothing to do here. And I would also like to say that today, the nature and the role of operators, internet operators, has changed so much. They've transformed into a completely new player, different type of player. They stopped being just an infrastructure for data transfer, transmission, and they're actively engaged in promoting such solutions which move away and start competing with banks. They are owners of huge databases and data sets. They provide different types of services, and the nature of the telecom sector has changed drastically. And because of that, just like in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan started developing a digital code. And the reason for developing a digital code was to make sure that all players that work at this market would change the nature and the form of and the modus operandi, and they started facing so many laws that contradicted each other and created different collisions. That's why we decided to get together in one place everything that pertains to digital infrastructure, and including G-clouds, including data processing centers in the telecom sector, and everything that has to do with data, that's big data, artificial intelligence, internet things, personal data, spacious data. All this comes in one document, and we are at the completion stage of this document. And I know that our organization and your ministry considered our organization as a developer of the digital code or a writer of the digital code. And the main thing that I'd like to say is that what is the role of the legislation? The legislation and the intervention or in the intervention of the government in the government's involvement in the service providers operations does not guarantee that the human rights will be protected. But the government and the state, by placing their regulations, they're trying to act as a middleman and the regulator of different collisions which occur between between operators. Going back to interconnection, I'd like to say, and the previous presenter before me said that this relations between operators, most likely, these are private arrangements, and these are just regular agreements. And pretty much all governments came up with a question about the legality of the player that provides peering services and that provides interoperator relations or relations between operators. So the first question is, should he be licensed, or should they be licensed? Should they regulated? Should they be controlled? I think that nothing of the kind is needed, because their role is just to carry data from point A to point B and connect them. They're not providing services to the population, they're just connecting different networks. However, considering the fact that we live in Asia and appetites here are that this is what we inherited from the Soviet Union. We want to control everything. We think that if we control everyone, we will be able to control it. We will be able to control the dog, how many times it goes out to pee, how many times it will eat, and how many times it will bring us litter. But life showed us that it's very difficult to control everything. And in this case, we believe that in order for the market to develop, in order to have this dynamic development, in order for the market to be flexible and respond quickly to any changes, because the IP traffic is overloaded right now, and voice messages go out, and what happens is that without regulatory measures, we create a lot more barriers with this regards. The most important thing is that the standards are observed, and these standards cannot be imposed by every individual government. They have to be international, which would be agreed on and which would negotiated at the international level. We see that, and it's doable, it's feasible. It is a difficult process, but it does exist. So going back to why the government should regulate telecom and everyone who provides interconnections. Well, first of all, to make sure that they are interconnected so that the users of different network operators can get a hold of each other, transfer data to each other. Another thing is to make sure that they're compatible. I think that nobody would argue with the fact that compatibility should be there. Number three is distribution of resources. We have a limited resources. This is radio frequency and a limited resource, which is a
numbering resource, and that's a totally different story. And of course, the most important thing is to make sure that access to the market is provided and granted. And what's important is that the domination of several individual players and that are monopoly players leads to the fact that it's very difficult for newcomers and players to come into the market. And the last thing is security and ensuring security. And that's why we, by developing the code, we proposed to minimize the number of licenses to 1 or 2. And our operators responded by saying we disagree. We disagree for 2 reasons. First is that how can we work without somebody on top of us? So do we not belong to anybody so we can do whatever we want to? So and I said, why? Well, in Europe, ISP is not licensed, but yet they operate absolutely normally. Why are you so afraid of working without any licenses? The second reason why they were against it was because they said, what is this? We've gone through so many processes of getting licenses, etc., to get here, but a new players come in to everything when everything's ready without having to do anything. We totally disagree with that. So these were 2 main reasons, but the reality is that there's a huge fear that when a new broom is in operation, it can broom in its own matter, and any rule can lead to emergence of even worse rules that would have a negative economic impact on everyone. So this process, the process of transformation of regulations and regulatory database, regulatory legal frame, it's very difficult. It's very complex, and the difficulty is that we cannot play on one part of the field, because that means we have to have harmony with other countries which we work with, where we take traffic from. We have to harmonize our activities with our neighbors, with Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and it's a more complicated situation here. That's why we are trying to consider the most recent trends that we're seeing at the global level. And of course, with regards to artificial intelligence, we're using the most recent decisions of the European Union on GDPR and personal data protection. But with regards to telecommunications, when we see all these solutions and NSA and RIPE NCC's work, we see that everything boils down to standards. Everyone's proposing certain mechanisms to make sure that they are compatible. And I think this is sufficient. This is enough. I think that we have to limit the market and make it free, because controlling everything, I don't know what's going to happen with technologies tomorrow, and I don't know which operators are going to come into the market tomorrow and how they're going to interact with each other. And the last challenge that we're experiencing is pretty much in all the countries, including Kazakhstan, is taxation of interconnections. This is a totally different story, because in my country, we went to a number of court hearings and I helped 3 operators. For some reason, tax inspection believes that the well which connects 2 wires, 2 cables, Kazakh and Kyrgyz, for example, is what should be taxed. So what if we connect it in Kazakhstan? How are we going to tax it? How are you going to tax it? And of course, it's clear that governments are trying to get money into their budget, and they don't think about consequences. However, we who develop regulations, who develop legal base, and in my country, I wrote over 100 regulations and norms. 70 of them have been passed and been in use, and I am afraid, because I don't know how to describe it in such a way as to make sure that it's technically feasible and it wouldn't prevent the work, but at the same time, so that the tax people would understand it, because tax inspections have a completely different picture in their mind. For example, we had a problem where tax inspectors would come in and say, well, you're downloading this software from GitHub. Why don't you pay a tax, the import tax? So try to answer the question. Try to answer the question of the tax inspector and explain to him. He said, you're downloading it from the cloud, right? And the cloud is not the territory of Kyrgyzstan. Similarly, we see the same thing with internet traffic. How do you calculate it? How can we calculate how can we figure out which is exported, which is imported, for example? The amount, we have so many problems right now around it. Same with security issues. And somebody before you just said, or maybe you said it, that there are new requirements, security, safety requirements are coming up, and the security authority is, or security bodies, right? State security bodies, and they are totally out of it. They are very concerned that they switched it on, they switched the internet, they cannot control it anymore, they can't understand who's running where, and they're trying to come up with numerous things. But in reality, I understand what their concern is. I understand why they're concerned. But more often than not, their requirements turn into, and they focus on making money. For example, I am concerned when interconnection for international traffic is monopolized. Of course, it's more convenient for them and it's cheaper to control all the traffic. But if you look at it from the standpoint of the market, I can dictate my prices, the prices that I like. And why does Kyrgyzstan has the cheapest internet right now, even given the fact that we're buying internet from Kazakhstan? Can anybody answer this question? The similar thing happens with Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. Yes, so you can draw conclusions from here, because truth is security and ensuring security and control of the content. Any types of monopolizations are not gonna enhance the security, and we have to recognize this fact and understand that the government should make money, and that's their interest. And monopolization like this reduces tax income and tax revenues. You have to understand this as well. So we have to switch on our brain and understand that security is first of all analytics. The security is first of all correct storage, and security is first of all regulation of levels of access, and not the possibility to connect everyone and install hardware, copying hardware that everyone should pay for, etc., and so on and so forth. So we have to revisit all approaches, and not just about, I'm not just talking about tax services, but also security questions. The most recent cyber attacks that we saw, because of our geopolitical situation, we are under huge press every day on the part of different, we're threatened, we have a risk of being attacked. So why don't we join our effort, and the operators, everyone at their level, they're fighting. And from a standpoint of peering, we have to unite our effort as well and join our effort. When we all receive internet, and the transit zone is Russia, that we all understand that as well. Why don't we join and create an alternative interconnection, just in case, because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I know that Kazakh minister from Kazakhstan, and he announced that Kazakhstan is building a new alternative channel in Azerbaijan to Azerbaijan via through the Caspian Sea. But I think that the four countries should unite and build this together and determine, maybe working together, we will be able to harmonize our standards and harmonize our regulations. And Viva to Central Asia. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That's very interesting, but I think that we don't face too many threats from Russia, because January events demonstrated that Kazakhstan was switched off from the internet completely. Was never lost in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. There are transit channels and there are direct channels via Russia to London or via Asia to Hong Kong. Azerbaijan is just an additional channel which emerged, and I think that the question that's more relevant today is regulation of IETs. And of course, peering is clear because peering in Kazakhstan is officially here. I don't know when was the last time, have you ever seen the director of peering center of Kazakh Telecom? I don't think they have any chairs or furniture to sit on, no office really, because it just exists virtually.
Хорошо. Я имею в виду, что это нечто из облака.
What I mean that it's something from the sphere of a cloud. That is why I have a question to Kevin. In your opinion, of regulation of the IXPs in Central Asia, do you think it's is useful? Do you think European experience is applicable to Central Asian realm? You know, so you're regulating, I think it started in 2003 in European countries, like in terms of the internet exchange, you know, how do you think your experience is applicable to our situation?
Well, I remember being involved in something called the London Internet Exchange in 1994. So it was a bit before 2003. And I think the experience of that that IXP, which has been really quite successful with very minimal regulation, would demonstrate that probably, in my personal opinion, that less regulation is better than more regulation. But, you know, I'm not from this region. I'm not from any of the countries in this region. I think each country needs to make its own decisions according to its circumstances. So I'm not here to say how countries should regulate this type of thing. I'm just here to come and sort of point out, compare the different regulatory regimes, and you can then maybe draw some conclusions from the success of, you know, the sort of the price of the internet, the speed of the internet, the ease of connecting to the internet. And I think you can draw the conclusions from that. I mean, my colleague here talked a lot about Kyrgyzstan, which I think has been, you know, quite a success in the region. And it's probably no coincidence that there's less regulation there and it's easier to set up an IXP. But again, yeah, I think that yeah, it's something that needs to be you know, sort of decided by the local communities rather than, you know, other people coming and making these sort of recommendations. But yeah, my view is to present the evidence and go base that on, you know, base your decision on the evidence that you see from the cost, speed, ease of connection.
Окей. Вдогонку вопрос. Еще один вопрос, Кевин. Вот то исследование...
One more question to Kevin. So the study or the research you have done this year on Interconnect and also IXPs in Central Asian region. So first of all, is it a public domain? Is it open for people to actually look at this report? And whenever you plan to complete it, when do you think you will finish your report or review or research?
Well, I mean, the report is, I think we can make that available. I mean, what you saw on the slides is not far different to what the actual report says. I mean, it's pretty much that. And so, I mean, I think that we can make that available. It's not available online at the moment, but, you know, provided that we give credit is given to you know, the people that funded it, I don't see any issue with making that available. In terms of the report, I mean, we don't have specific plans to update that, but we would like feedback on this. So it was a sort of one-off study to try to get a snapshot of the situation, because we really heard completely different opinions, even within the same country. So we just tried to get a sort of starting point so we can start having this discussion. And so, you know, it will hopefully encourage some feedback, and people can say, okay, that's correct, that's not correct. You know, we've had some update already from the audience, so I think that's great. So that's really what this is intended for.
Спасибо. Так, я воспользовался своим правом модератора, задавал вопросы. Теперь кто хочет...
So I had my right as a moderator to ask questions, but now you can, any people sitting in the room, you can actually ask question on our region or whatever you're interested in. Any questions? Anybody who wants to ask a question? Nishal? Nishal?
Okay. Here is a... Do you need a microphone?
I think there's no microphone.
Yeah, yes, please.
Everybody's too polite. Everybody's too polite. Anyways, thank you for the talks and the presentations. I just wanted to comment on the idea of taxation based on traffic and downloads and internet going back and forth. The idea seems to be coming up time and time again through different operators, different venues, through different forums. Even recently within Europe, we heard like ETNO, which is the Association of European Network Operators, talking about center pays. Basically, they wanted the over the top, the OTTs, the Googles and the others paying them for use of their network. Time and time again, that idea has been proven to be a bad idea. Is there a forum or a area where we can provide these insights and this information to help provide factual information and decisions? There's work been done by the OECD and other organizations that has spoken to this. I'm curious if we can do something to help provide more insights in this area.
По-моему, один из вопросов нашего сегодняшней современности.
So one of the modern sort of issues. So can we split it into two questions or you can answer? Okay. Yes, a taxation, unexpectedly, so we thought everything is quite clear and straightforward, but the nature of relations had changed and everybody thinks it should be taxed. Everything should be taxed. But the initiators of Google tax, we call it Google tax. Appeared if in Russia it was initiated, it had to do with localization of data. But in our countries, this idea was taken by buyers, those who sell or do e-commerce, e-trading, because they thought, because by this, they will be able to push out big platforms and will be able to develop local platforms. But in my case, in Kyrgyzstan, that's what happened, Association of E-Commerce Association, in spite of our resistance, they pushed through and the ideas was supported by European Commission, by the way. It was very strange. But as a result, so deputies had approved and they have the Google tax introduced. It's a Meta, TikTok, and all the other platforms, Amazon, eBay, name it, So it's the surprising fact is that currently there is a new initiative now being discussed by the e-commerce association. They're asking to actually remove this taxation law now. So, but our tax authorities, they love it. They like this money. They don't want to go in reverse. That's very difficult to actually go back, to what it was. And we have a report on the effect of this taxation being introduced. We have this report, it's available. We've presented it to the Ministry of Digital Development. You can look up to their site. It's in both languages, in English, Russian. It's about taxation of internet media, so, and taxation of the telecom providers is there too, but the effect was negative actually. And adding okay, nobody received more money into the budget, unfortunately, but we saw that about 30% went to the shadow economy. Nobody wanted to do it. Nobody wanted to pay. The sort of trade is the same, but there is less taxes for some reason. So you can look up the statistics in order to have the evidence-based sort of statement that such approach has a negative effect. But from the other side, we have to talk with these platforms globally on because there is such a problem, there is such an issue. For example, we pay for advertisement in Meta. So they do not send financial invoices in a form acceptable for our accounting offices. So they are not standardized, for our, it's not a proof, to our government that we paid everything. And they say it's your problems. We don't care. So we have to work through the intermediate sort of company or through a liaison company who all they do is just simply give us the documents which are acceptable for our government. And we talked and they say that they cannot fix this problem because they are regulated by the American standards and standards of other countries. We don't care, about them, and that is a problem for us. Yes, we gathered a lot of information about taxation issues on Uzbekistan, also on Tajikistan. We did not collect information on Kazakhstan. You can actually use the information we gathered. Unfortunately, we're pressed for time, and the time for the last question.
Hello, Nishal Govardhan, Packet Clearinghouse. First, thank you. Your speech was wonderful. I learned a lot, so thank you. Thank you. But my comment is for Kevin, which is to say that it's less of a question than a comment. You've explained the situation with the regulation in internet exchange points in the region. That was nice, thank you. And then you contrasted it with Western Europe, which is a clearly more developed region. It would probably be a better idea if you considered more developing nation states as well. And for context, for those of you that don't know, I do a lot of work in developing nation countries. There's very little regulation around internet exchange points there. If you're curious, I'm very happy to answer questions. You pushed for time.
Thank you.
Could I just quickly respond? So I think your good point, well made, Nishal. One of the reasons I put the Western situation up is because, Western European situation up is because actually that was in the report comparison with some selected Western European economies. And I think the idea is to have a juxtaposition between the extremes. So I think that's the rationale behind it. But I think that's a fair comment.
Спасибо. Да, теперь буквально 30 секунд, и мы завершаем.
Just 30 seconds to complete the session. The next, we will have a session tomorrow about measurements, and it will talk about the measurement instruments and Roman, the issue which you actually raised. It will be very interesting. You can actually see what we do have and how is it different from other regions. Let's thank our speakers, our panelists for their work. So our session is completed. Thank you very much.